Yeah, it did. Hard to be 20 people. Water might be way back there. Something that's they have to get the deadline.
I don't think there's going to be public comment. I'm going to roll out of here.
Wonder if you could, everybody could take a seat, please.
Once we're done with this.
Yeah.
Yes.
We were probably there. We're at the other part of the house.
So we're already out of copies.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Council has the copies, so does the media, and so does some of our employees do too, and several members of the public.
I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council work session to order. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Alderman Lauer.
Yes.
Alderman Sage.
Here.
Alderman Milawamwe.
Here.
Alderman Stern.
Here.
Alderman Painter. Here. Alderman Schmidt. Here. Alderman Black.
Here.
Alderman Howman.
Here.
Alderman Fruin.
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. And we're going to start to see, is there a public comment on this work session at this point? No, we didn't have any cards. Okay. Thank you. We'll move right along to the presentation. And just to clarify, this was meant to basically begin to clarify the issues that we have in front of us and possibilities. This was not meant, obviously, in 20 minutes to be a definitive beginning and end all. It's just, this is some initial information. If we got time for some initial reactions, great. But then we're obviously going to be thinking about this, talking to our constituents and talking to people at the mayoral open houses and whatever, and move forward. So anyway, I will go ahead and turn it over to our city manager. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could just add to that, I think the greatest question the council or staff and myself are seeking tonight is, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to, have you feel like you've received enough information from staff and the public now that we've completed an online budget survey, citizen summit? So at this point in time, staff, more than anything is trying to understand, when would you like to move in the direction of making a decision one way or another, or among many options, or do you need more information, or just want more time, as the mayor said, talking with constituents? So we're looking for a little clear direction as to when you want to bring this back for formal action by the council, and is there anything you want prior to that from city staff or the public? So with that, we're just going to have Steve Rasmussen, Assistant City Manager, take a few minutes and just give a few highlights on the information you have in the packet, and then we'll turn it back to you for your discussion. And Steve, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Steve Arney to help me with the slides here so I can point to some things on it. We have 20 minutes. I'm only going to take about 10 minutes if I can to allow all of you a few moments to discuss this. And before we go into it, I'd like to say three quick things. Number one, I'd like to thank the people that have been working on this for about the last month in great detail. The finance department, Patty Lynn and her people, Laura, has helped a great deal on that. Steve Arney and Jim Karch in the public works department, and then some people down there in the solid waste has also helped. I'd like to recognize George Kutz and his people, who've also given us some invaluable insight into what goes on out there, because they're the ones out there every day picking things up, and so they have good insight into what people's habits are. Could you give me that first slide, please? These slides that you have today are a little different than what you may have gotten earlier, because we keep going through these every day and keeping on working on these and refining them. And up here, what I said in the first note there is the purpose of tonight's briefing is to try to help make the enterprise fund balance. And the word balance there is a verb, not a noun. It's not the fund balance. We want to make this this enterprise fund balance if we can. Several years ago, the council decided to make solid waste an enterprise fund, which means that the expenditures in the fund shouldn't exceed the money that it takes in. At this stage of the game, we haven't been able to achieve that. So then I'll talk a little bit about the 2015 performance, which we still have yet to finish out. And then, of course, the important thing is, what do we do to balance this fund in the 2016 budget, which we'll have to put together here very shortly. And then I have some recommendations, and I want to point out that these recommendations are my recommendations. I chaired the working group from the staff that put this together, and I wanted to make sure that the staff came back to you with a recommendation. One thing about the recommendation for sure is I'm sure that's not where you'll end up, but we have an obligation to give you something other than just say, this is a tough problem and it's your problem now. So what we did was we gave you the best technical data that we could, so it forms a starting place from you to make these tough political decisions that you'll have to make. And what we've given you here is as much information as we can to go forward. Okay, Steve? Here's the key issue. Up on the left-hand side, you see in red is solid waste services. For 2016, what we anticipate was this fund will be $2.5 million in deficit. What happens is, in solid waste, the total expense is $8 million. And what we make is $5.5 million. That makes us $2.5 million short. So you can do one of two things. One, you can subsidize it. But subsidize is kind of a misnomer. It's not like there's a magic pot to bring that money out of somewhere. The way you subsidize it is subsidize it from some other tax fund, like property tax fund. Or what you can do is not bring it from somewhere else and make some changes within the fund, like increase the charges to customers on bulk, or you can decrease bulk services, or, as you see on that list, some combination of those things to make the fund balance without taking money from somewhere else. And we'll go through those a little bit because I want to show you the data that you'll be able to deal with. Okay? Now, this chart shows the actual work in solid waste. And these figures are not representative. They're actual figures. So if you look up there in bulk and brush, each one of those figures represents a person. So there are 21 employees there, and they're divided up into 3 crews, and each crew has 4 trucks and a bucket loader. So that's the actual number of people you have there. In garbage and recycling, which we pick up with the carts, you also have represented there the actual number. So you have 11 employees with 11 trucks. There it only takes 1 employee driving 1 truck because they're automated and they can lift the trash. Now what's important about this slide is to recognize that the top half of that represents 60% of the expenses of running the fund. On the bottom, garbage and recycling represents only 40% of it. But on the bottom, the 40% garbage and recycling produces all of the income because we only charge for carts. So the $5.5 million that we get comes from garbage and recycling. We do not charge for anything on the top. And so you can see 60% of the work that we do, we don't receive any income from, and garbage and recycling supports all of it, but not completely. It only supports $5.5 million of the $8 million that the fund costs us. Okay, Steve? Now, I also want to remind you, though, that the people in solid waste do some other things. So if you look up here, you see that we also have a street sweeping. People from solid waste do the street sweeping. They also run the drop-off center, so there's 1 or 2 people in the drop-off center every day. And then during the leaf periods of time, they're also the people that are out there driving the leaf suckers. And right today, you may well note, and we have some of our people out tonight, they also do snow and ice removal. So those people do a multitude of things as well as just solid waste, depending upon what the need is required. And that requires some careful management. Okay? Now here's the tough slide, and it looks very busy, and it's the one that you're going to be able to work with the most. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 1 or 2 lines on this just to show you how it works. Every time we say, well, what could we do? We come up with some options and people say, well, what if we did this? Okay, we put that down as an option and we run out the projection. So what you see here is in the columns, on the left column in the middle, you see fiscal year 2015, and that is what we project is going to happen this year. Then the next one, we say 2016 budget, and then skip over a column, we say 2017. So we run these out to show what it looks like. Now, I'll take a look at one. And so over on the far left-hand side, you see option A. It says, make no change. So if you run that over, and I've circled that for emphasis, what it amounts to, in parentheses, you have a deficit for the 2016 year budget of $2.5 million. Now, we ran all of these different options because everyone who looks at it says, but maybe we could just do this. We say, great. We run that out and take a look at what it looks like. What I've done, though, in the orange circles, I've circled the ones that actually work. And the reason I say that, it's not really a viable option if it doesn't solve the problem. I've circled all of the ones that get us within plus or minus of $500,000 of budget of balancing the fund. We can get to within $500,000 of balancing the fund. That's well within the probability of error because we're just projecting what happened in the future. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. If you look down there, for example, and you look at one like option C2, the first one that's in a circle, charge $75 for every bucket. Okay, then you go over to the 2016 column and you see there were only $18,000 in arrears. That works pretty good, but $75 is a pretty stiff hit for every bucket. If you go down to another one, for example, let's go down to E2, the third circle down. You could charge every customer a flat rate of $30 for whatever size cart they get. Well, you could do that. Some people think that would work, and that ends up well to the positive, except what you're doing is you have people who aren't using the bulk waste, subsidizing the bulk waste. So the answer here has got to be some combination there that the public and that you are comfortable with. Now, what I've done is I've put in a black circle the other circle down there, which is $495. We call that option G1, and that says charge $25 for every bucket loader with a rate structure, but also then assumes a 50% less bulk waste pickup. The reason for that is if you charge $25 for every pickup, you will probably get less pickups because people will figure out how to do that. You'll only have it picked up every other week, or you'll share one with your neighbor. So what happens is you increase the charge there by a little bit, but it helps produce an efficiency in the system. And what that does, it means then you'll have to have less cost and you'll get more income. And that's why we get to within $495,000 under that projection. Now, it assumes a 50% less bulk pickup. Where did I get that number? Well, that's an educated guess. We all worked together and we saw what will happen. And so we talked amongst ourselves, we asked people, and we took a guess at that. We don't know what that'll be, but if we choose to do something like that, in 3 or 4 months, we'll know exactly what it is. If it's right, we could emphasize it. If it's wrong, we can go back and adjust something. We don't know until we try, but we made an assumption there. So that's how this chart works, and I'm sure that every one of you can come up with another option, and I'll put 10 more options on there for you for the next time we get together.
Okay.
Okay, Steve. Now, I said I'd cover recommendations, and I've got several here. Number one is the cart charges. We found out that when we included a smaller cart at a smaller cost, many people went to the smaller cart. So we didn't get any more money by raising the cart fees. So what we're proposing to do is freeze the cart size under this option. The cart you've got now is the cart you've got, and then the cart you get is depending on the size of people in your household. The more people in the household, the bigger cart you've got. And that would tend to reduce the fact that you would have a 35-gallon cart and then all kinds of extra bags and everything hanging off of it when you really needed a 65-gallon cart. and we charge all new customers $60 so they buy the cart to begin with. There is a human nature to that will not give much credibility to those things you get free. If you pay $60 for a cart, then for cart and you take care of it. The second thing we propose, and this is what we call option G1, and that is charging $25 for every bucket load. And what we were hoping there is that what that does is it does not cause a great deal of expense to everyone, but it helps produce an effect. And then down at the third option, it said subsidize solid waste by $500,000. You look at number 2, that works pretty good, but you see it still gets us $500,000 short. Well, where do you get that? Well, it has to come from somewhere, and there are a number of places you can come from. One of the things that can come from the general fund reserve, but that money has to come from somewhere because there's no money in there, and you don't want to take that money to lower the reserve, so you have to put it back in. And so just as an example, I said, what does it take? $1,000? Well, $1 million you get from the average household by raising the cost $13 a year. So if you raise property tax by $13 a year for the average house, it gets you $1 million. So $7 or 66 a month, 60 cents a month on the property tax gets you that extra $500,000. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the only option. I'm just showing you how this works so that as you go through it and as you look at what you want to add, how you want to cut it up, how you want to slice it and dice it, that gives you an example of how some of these things might come together. And then the next slide is what happens is this will cause the market to determine the service level. You will have less pickup because you'll have less, you have more expense to do it, maybe. But what happens then, we'll have less people that'll be working in this. And what I've shown by those arrows is those individuals that then will not be doing solid waste because we have a less need for it and thus save money in the solid waste fund. They can go over to public works and parks and recreation. I'm currently sitting on 7 or 8 or 9 vacancies, and that number varies from day to day, of critical positions we have to fill in those other departments in 2016. And so we could use some of these experienced, skilled employees that are now in solid waste that could go over and move some and fill some of those critical positions in the other department that we so desperately need to fill. And the market would determine that. We can't exactly tell what it would look like now, but we'll know soon enough as we change the process. And then 5, we can also explore some other efficiencies. One of the things is we could use the knuckle boom trucks to lift up solid waste. Of course, when you do that, it doesn't lift up everything. Somebody still has to get out by hand and sweep some things. They currently cost about $150,000. So if we're trying to reduce the expense in the fund, we can't reduce the fund by buying a bunch more equipment. Explore that and maybe get one to put in there and see what kind of an efficiency we would get there. And also then, if we reduce the amount of pickup that we've got, one of the things that would happen is that we could use a call-in and just call in when you want us to pick it up, and then we could come out and pick up the location rather than running everybody on all of the routes. Okay, Steve, I think that's our last slide.
Okay, well, we're really running tight here, Steve. And then I know you needed to walk us through what all this was. And obviously, we're not going to be able to make any decisions right now. We're supposed to start township in just a couple minutes. I'll ask if I've got 1 or 2 very quick, at this point, maybe just questions rather than statements from the council, so we can at least begin to take a look at this, digest this, bring this back to some of our constituents, get some reactions. Alderman Milawambwe.
Sure, I thought he was
I'm sorry.
first.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see on slide number, let's see, the busy one. You don't have an option for $50.
Yeah, yes,
There are particular reasons
that's
for that?
right. We just went from 25 to 75, and we went halfway in between that. That would be 50, but if you'd like, I'll run 50 out and show you what it looks like.
Sure.
Sure.
And then I also would like to know what the composition of the committee was in terms of, and I'm not looking for names, I'm looking more
Sure.
for, functions, you know, with
That was not by any means a citizens committee or elected officials. It was the people I mentioned before. It was finance and public works, and we asked for some input from the people from solid waste, and I chaired that committee. So these recommendations, I synthesized that, and so those would be my recommendations as the chairman of that group.
Okay. Alderman Black and then Sage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Steve, for that presentation. And one of my takeaways from the Citizen Summit is that we need to do a better job of educating the public on some of the challenges that we face. My question would be, what does the timeline look like? I know we want to take this back to our constituents for some feedback and some reaction. Are we talking about next city council meeting, early February?
Well, I think that's up to us.
That's up to us?
That's part of what the staff is asking. You know,
Sure.
At this point, I think maybe we begin the conversation, we begin to think about it, and perhaps we weigh in at the next city council meeting and to see where we are and how quickly we want to move on this.
Certainly. I mean, my only feedback in that case would be that I think another work session where the council can kind of deliberate amongst itself about what we think it needs to look like, and then subsequent votes maybe a week or two after that point.
That makes sense. David.
I was just going to say that, you know, because summer, spring, summer, fall is really the bulk waste season, we were thinking that if you made a sooner decision, we could educate people before service began, expanded. But again, we can do it at your leisure. But certainly we'll take that one comment, you know, maybe another work session for the council to get into this more in depth. So.
Alderman Lauer.
just one thing that the public seems to be missing, and our conversation has been missing, is that we had planned to subsidize this in the current year, and historically we have been subsidizing this fund, as far as I know, forever. At one point, we paid 100% of it out of our property taxes.
Right.
So, am I correct there?
Well,
So what was the figure that we had planned to subsidize for last current year?
well, in the current year, we're still subsidizing the solid waste fund by about 1.2 million, plus or minus. Right now, we're looking at continuing that same amount of subsidy next year, barring any kind of change in decision. But we've built that into these projections. So even with that current subsidy, we're looking at ending this particular fund with a negative fund balance over $2 million. Then we face, do we take that money out of fund balance reserve, general fund balance reserve, or how do we cover that huge deficit? So that's, you know, what we're trying to come up with a financial game plan, how to address that.
Okay. All right. Alrighty. Thank you very much. We have... Diana? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, do we have access to this online?
Yes, that's currently posted online right now on the city's website. And that's the most current copy, what you see now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Steve. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. At this point, we do need to move on to township. So do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderman Black. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Schmidt. All in favor signify by saying aye. Okay, and then we will gather in about 1 minute for township. Thank you. I do see Deb Skilrud here someplace too, and Steve Scudder.